And now for the fun part, let's do some historics. I have a friend who is convinced that people, whatever the period, Greeks, Middle Ages, Renaissance, modern times, actual times, they all see the world more or less in the same way. There is not very much difference to it. Well, I'm afraid I have to disappoint him. The atmosphere is very different. Take the Greeks, for instance. For the Greeks, the Greeks, I mean male above 20 and free men. For the Greeks, the most essential thing was living, conducting a good life. Not good in the sense of plentiful of everything, but good in the sense of righteous. The life as it has to be. The world then was perceived not as a mechanical clockwork, for instance, in the time of Newton, and in the period Newton lived, the world was seen as a mechanical thing, working with wheels turning around, etc. But for the Greeks, it was a turbulent, a dynamic unit, a unity, pulsing, full of potentiality. Everything had its meaning. Everything wanted to do or to be somewhere. Now, concerning the mind, there is one aspect of the mind which is etheric, translucent, and that's the cognition. But otherwise, what was considered to be mind, spiritual, the spirit, spiritus animalis, the pneuma psychikon, was considered to be something like an etheric gas, a gas-like substance. When a soldier was killed at the battlefield, his pneuma psychikon was like a gas escaping him, leaving the corpse behind, lifeless. So mind was, in most cases, understood in the same realm as material, as the body. So mind was not intransitive yet. Intransitive meaning something on its own. It was part of the body. It's only becoming different much later with Thomas von Aquino in the 13th century, which made a strict division between mind and body. And the mind was something given by God. So for the Greeks, it was one unit, it was material, that's the most important thing to consider. The mind was something more body-like, more material, a gas-like substance. Galilei is the man who made the difference, making the difference. I'm talking about Galilei, but actually he's exponential for a change in atmosphere in his time. Now, he didn't want to make that difference, but the effects of his way of acting, of his way of conducting experiments, made the difference. We should still consider that Galilei lived in an atmosphere in which Aristotelian ideas dominated. Everything was fluctuating, everything was dynamic, everything was full of potentiality. Well, that remained like that. But what did Galilei change? He conducted experiments and noted the position in figures. Steps in between also measured and noted the results. And he noted also the end result. Now, he saw that when he started doing that same experience under the same circumstances again, the end result was exactly the same. Didn't they know that before Galilei? Of course they knew that before Galilei, but then they knew that more or less on the level of intuition, while Galilei systematized it and mathematized it. So what he did was, the central thing he did was measuring. Now, for measuring, one does not need all those potentialities, all those dynamics. One needs only a condition at a certain time, an inert mass which is prone for measurement. And that's all what is needed. So what is happening here? The model he is introducing, he is de facto introducing, is that, I would say, of a plumber. You do this, and this effect results from it. So you can make predictions. In that sense, what is now making predictions is that successful that it actually, unwillingly, redefined what an object is. While for Aristotle, an object was something which was more or less had a life in it, it had potentiality in it. For Galilei, the object was inert and was massive. It was there, point final, nothing more to it. Yes. So this changed the appreciation of an object. It redefined, it took some time, but it actually redefined what an object was. Now, this type of measurement, the body is also applied onto the body. Think, for instance, of craniometry, from which phrenology is coming forth from. Think of measuring intelligence. Think of measuring bodies, body-like characteristics in comparative anthropology. Think of Quetelet, the figures of Quetelet and Galton, a nephew of Darwin. So the body, the object, is getting redefined, and measurement, taking measurements, is the core of it. Now, what do we have on the mind side? I have already mentioned that the mind was considered to be a substance by Aquino, a substance on its own. It became intransitive. Secondly, we have the translucency of cognition. Think of the world of ideas of Plato in the Greek period. We have an ethical realm, of which I didn't talk so far, introduced by Zarathustra, the good and the bad, the struggle between them, which is not palpable. It's something escaping the material dimension. And we have now, on top of all those things already existing, we have now the remains, what has been cut away, what has been left out by Galilei. He didn't intentionally not do that. He didn't want to cut out all those dynamics, but he didn't need it. So these dynamics remained, but they remained unexplained. While in the period of Aristotle, in the period Aristotelian ideas lived, it was explained, it was potentiality, but now it is left out. So what is remaining now? We have the body, the object, and the body as an object being prone for measurement, can be measured, and on the other side we have an enriched, an enlarged realm of mind existing on its own. There is yet another factor of importance, a factor described by the cultural sociologist Norbert Elias in The Process of Civilization. What is it about? Well, he draws the attention to the fact that in the Middle Ages, after the Middle Ages, urbanization became ever more prominent. While the people before that lived in the country, in small or on their own, families, a family of farmers, or in small communities, counting no more than, or counting between 50 and 150 people. Cities, towns became ever more important, having thousands of people. Now, we have to take into account that the people living in the country were in a way complete. They were self-sufficient. One man, one family, for instance, did everything, from cultivating the land, to making clothes, to making shoes, everything. While now in the city, in the town, with thousands of people, labor became differentiated. You had shoemakers, you had weavers, you had people coloring things, etc. So the social roles became diversified. Even stronger, in one social role, even a task became divided up into smaller parts. Now, this has a profound effect on the psychology of the people. Because in first instance, living in the country, well, there was social control. The others told you when you did things they didn't please them. They punished you. So the control was external. While in the town, with thousands of people, you had to control yourself, otherwise the task never was done. You have to coordinate with others. You have to control yourself. So Elias calls that the transition from external fremdzwang, external control, to selbstzwang, control over yourself. What is that now meaning? What is the importance of it? That is that there is a movement coming from a transition from outside to inside. So outer control to inner self-control. An anecdote is the case, has nothing to do with control, but it's anecdotal, it's typical for the atmosphere, for the change in atmosphere. Reading, in first, people couldn't read. Only the clergy could read. So reading was done aloud to allow people to listen to what was in the book, to what the reader was pronouncing. But one day, Saint Ambrose was reading silently for himself, and people thought he was getting mad because they didn't know that feature. So being internal, the reading for oneself, silently for oneself, was completely ridiculous. It was insane. It was considered to be insane. So that to demonstrate what a radical difference it made from an external controlled behavior to an internal controlled behavior. Now, it's only in that sense, for instance, that Freud can be understood. Freud describes a pathology of people which are extremely controlling themselves. Sometimes I'm reading articles about psychoanalytical people, psychoanalytics, who try to analyze happenings, people from the Middle Ages or from the Greeks or whatever, or from Egypt. I think that's ridiculous, because psychoanalysis as a model, the psychodynamical model, is only raising from and can only be applied to people who are controlling themselves into a strong way. I will come back for a second on the illustration of Ambrose, because it is a very good, it is a striking illustration of the fact that the people then, in general, did not have a clue, did not have one idea of what it was to have an inner life. They knew, of course, since Aquino, they knew, of course, that God provided man with a soul, but having an inner life, as Ambrose reading to himself, in himself, was quite alien. But now, what is it actually, rounding up, what is it to have a mind? What is a mind? What does the term mean? Well, there is already one problem. The problem is that if the mind is something intransitive, something existing in itself, it cannot be found. It has not been found so far, which is quite problematic. But how do we have to understand the mind then? Well, I think in the sense of politics. If we are speaking of politics, that's a general categorization, that's a general term, that's a label, a general label for very particular actions, very particular lines of thought, very particular processes, gatherings, etc. So it refers, it's a general term, it's a dummy term, a cover term, referring to particular instances. And I think, if talking about the mind, is more or less the same thing. It's referring to other particular things, plus things in most cases not very well understood. And which are those cases? Well, I will name some. For instance, qualia. Beginning of the 20th century, the term got introduced by Lewis. Qualia is referring to the fact that experiencing a sunset is very different than writing or describing a sunset. Even if you write a poem about a sunset, even the poem will be very different to the real experience. Another element which could be put under the label mind is what Sartre called cette distance nulle, meaning when I say I'm feeling ill, I can ask who is the one speaking and who is the one spoken about. So knowing that it's one and the same, there is still a certain condition of distance, a distance which isn't actually there, cette distance nulle, a distance not existing. Endophasie, the inner voice, continuously going on, rattling on, never stopping. The inner voice is also something which can be put under the label mind, which finds its house under that label. The interiorization of guilt, as described when I was referring to Elias, the transition from an external control into an internal control. And the last one I will mention here is the complexity of thoughts, of plans, of models we can make in the mind. We can think of very complicated things. We can think of things very far away, ordered in a very strict order, all in the mind. I may conclude as following. Starting with the image of man consisting of a mind and a body as a self-evident assumption, having shown that concepts, as the building blocks of such an image, are constructs changing over time. The terms mind and body are dummy labels for contents and forms inherited from the past and processes and conditions not well understood. Mind is a historical presentation of affairs, as body is, as a material and measurable substance. This was a subject not all that easy, but I hope to have contributed in a better understanding of it. Thank you.